Amara was a typical college student, focused on her studies and enjoying the vibrant campus life. She was a bright, ambitious young woman, majoring in political science and dreaming of a career in public service. On most days, you could find Amara in the library, her head buried in textbooks, or chatting with friends over coffee in the student union. She was passionate about issues like education reform and environmental protection, but her activism was mostly limited to the occasional protest or petition. That all changed one fateful day in the middle of her junior year. Amara was in her dorm room, scrolling through the news on her laptop, when a headline caught her eye. Conflict escalates in the Middle East. Thousands killed in airstrikes. As she read the article, a growing sense of unease settled in the pit of her stomach. The reports were horrifying. Civilian casualties, hospitals being bombed, entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. Amara couldn't believe that this was happening, and that her government was supporting the military actions. Amara's initial shock quickly gave way to a burning desire to do something, anything, to stop the violence. She began attending campus rallies and protests, lending her voice to the growing chorus of students demanding an end to the war. At first, the demonstrations were peaceful, with students marching, chanting slogans, and holding vigils for the victims. Amara found a sense of purpose in these gatherings, surrounded by like-minded individuals who shared her outrage and determination. However, as the weeks passed, the situation on campus grew increasingly tense. The college administration, under pressure from the government, began to crack down on the protests, deploying campus security, and even calling in the National Guard to maintain order. What had once been a peaceful movement quickly descended into chaos. The police responded to the student protesters with overwhelming force, using tear gas, rubber bullets, and even physical beatings to disperse the crowds. Amara watched in horror as her fellow students were injured, some even hospitalized by the aggressive tactics. Despite the risks, Amara refused to back down. She continued to organize and participate in the protests, her passion for the cause only growing stronger in the face of adversity. She knew that the stakes were high, that the future of the country hung in the balance, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make her voice heard. As the protests escalated, the college administration and local authorities grew increasingly desperate to quell the unrest. In a shocking turn of events, the police opened fire on the unarmed students, unleashing a barrage of live ammunition into the crowd. Amara watched in horror as her friends and classmates fell around her, their bodies crumpling to the ground in a hail of bullets. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the anguished cries of the wounded. In the aftermath, the college and local authorities attempted to cover up the massacre, silencing the media and denying any wrongdoing. Amara, her heart heavy with grief and rage, knew that she could not let this atrocity go unchallenged. Amara's mind raced as she fled the scene, the images of her fallen friends seared into her memory. The police had shown no mercy, firing indiscriminately into the crowd of unarmed students. She had watched helplessly as her classmates, her comrades, had crumpled to the ground, their lives snuffed out in an instant. As she ran, Amara's grief gave way to a burning rage. How dare the authorities commit such a heinous act and then try to cover it up? They thought they could silence the truth, but they were wrong. Amara was determined to expose their crimes to the world, no matter what it took. She ducked into a nearby alley, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the cries of the wounded. Amara felt sick to her stomach, but she pushed the nausea aside. She had to keep moving, had to find a way to get her story out. As she rounded a corner, Amara came face to face with a group of police officers. They had their weapons drawn, their faces set in grim determination. Amara froze, her mind racing. She knew that she couldn't outrun them, not in her current state. "Freeze!" one of the officers shouted, his voice harsh and unyielding. "Put your hands up and get on the ground." Amara hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting around the alley. She could see no way out, no escape. The officers were closing in, their weapons trained on her. In a split second, Amara made a decision. She couldn't let the truth die with her, couldn't let the authorities get away with their crimes. With a burst of adrenaline, she lunged forward, snatching the gun from the nearest officer's hand. The officer cried out in surprise, but Amara didn't hesitate. She fired off a rapid series of shots, her aim true despite the trembling of her hands. One by one, the officers fell, their bodies crumpling to the ground. Amara stood there, her chest heaving, the gun still clutched in her hand. She couldn't believe what she had done, couldn't reconcile the violence of her actions with the peaceful ideals she had once held so dear. But there was no time to dwell on her guilt. She had to keep moving, had to find a way to get her story out. With a heavy heart, Amara turned and fled, leaving the fallen officers behind her. As she ran, Amara knew that she had crossed a line, that there was no going back. She was a fugitive now, a wanted criminal, but she also knew that she couldn't give up, couldn't let the truth be buried. She had to find a way to expose the authorities' crimes, to bring justice to those who had fallen. With each step, Amara's determination grew stronger. She would not rest until the world knew what had happened, until those responsible were held accountable. And if it meant taking even more drastic measures, she was prepared to do whatever it took. The stakes were too high, the injustice too great, to back down now. Amara's heart pounded as she fled the scene, the weight of what she had done weighing heavily on her conscience. She couldn't believe that she had resorted to such violence, that she had taken the lives of those officers. But in that moment, with her friends and classmates lying dead around her, she had felt a desperate need to fight back, to expose the truth no matter the cost. As she ran through the darkened alleys, Amara's mind raced. Where could she go? Who could she trust? The authorities were surely searching for her, determined to silence her and bury the truth of the massacre. She knew that she couldn't hide forever, that eventually she would have to make a move. Amara's thoughts turned to her mentor, Professor Jennings, a respected academic who had always encouraged her activism. He had been a voice of reason and support throughout the protests, and Amara knew that he would be horrified by the violence that had unfolded. Perhaps he could help her, provide her with a safe place to hide and a way to get her story out to the world. With renewed determination, Amara set off towards Professor Jennings's house, her grip on the stolen police weapon tightening with each step. As she approached the familiar brownstone, she scanned the area for any sign of danger. The street was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant wail of sirens. Amara hurried up the steps and knocked urgently on the door. After a moment, it swung open to reveal Professor Jennings, his face etched with concern. "Amara, what on earth is going on?" Amara pushed past him, her eyes wild. "Professor, I need your help. The police, they opened fire on the protesters. My friends, they're dead. And I..." Her voice trailed off as she realized what she had done. Professor Jennings ushered her inside, his expression grave. "Come in, child. Tell me everything." As Amara poured out her story, the professor listened intently, his face growing more and more troubled. When she had finished, he shook his head sadly. "Oh, Amara, what have you done?" Amara felt a wave of shame wash over her. "I know, Professor. I never meant for any of this to happen. But I can't let the truth die. I have to find a way to expose what the authorities have done." Professor Jennings sighed heavily. "I understand your need for justice, Amara, but violence is never the answer. It will only breed more violence, more hatred." Amara felt a surge of frustration. But what else can I do? The media is silent, the authorities are covering it up. If I don't act, no one will ever know the truth. The professor placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with compassion. "There are other ways to fight, Amara. Ways that don't involve bloodshed. You must find the strength within yourself to rise above the darkness, to be a beacon of hope in these troubled times." Amara nodded, her resolve hardening. She would find a way to expose the truth, to bring justice to her friends and classmates. but she would do it through peaceful means, through the power of her voice and her actions. She would be a living testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. As she stepped out into the night, Amara knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But she was ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. For her friends, for her cause, and for the future of her country, she would never give up, never surrender to the darkness that threatened to consume them all. But fate had other plans for Amara. As she made her way through the deserted streets, she was ambushed by a group of heavily armed police officers. They opened fire without warning, their bullets tearing through her flesh. Amara fell to the ground, her life slipping away as she watched the officers approach, their faces hidden behind masks. In her final moments, Amara realized the bitter irony of her situation. She had fought so hard for justice, only to be cut down by the very system she had sought to expose. The truth would die with her, buried beneath a mountain of lies and deceit. As the darkness closed in, Amara's thoughts turned to her fallen friends. She hoped that they would understand, that they would know that she had fought for them until the very end. But deep down, she knew that her death would only serve to further the cycle of violence and oppression. In the end, Amara's story was a tragic one, a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked power and the consequences of speaking truth to those in authority. Her death would become a rallying cry for those who sought to fight against injustice, but it would also serve as a reminder of the high price that sometimes must be paid for standing up for what is right.